Hello, everyone. It's Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is the 9th of November, 2022, day after the election, midterm elections. Click on the subscribe button in the lower right here to subscribe, and also the notification bell in the far upper right to be notified when they're released. And if you click on that bell, all of your rivals and enemies will be cast into the outer darkness where they will be endless wailing and gnashing of teeth. Okay, so my topic today is, does voter bribery work? The ecclesiastical wisdom that there is nothing new under the sun may be a cliche, but it is a cliche because its validity has stood the test of time. The post-bellum Republicans used Union veterans' pensions as a bribe to keep tariffs high, thereby benefiting the northern industrial states at the expense of the South. After the Carpetbag regimes collapsed in 1877, Republicans greatly liberalized Union veterans' pensions. The party also made sure the beneficiaries understood that tariffs, being the chief source of federal tax revenue, were also the main funding source for the pensions. Consequently, Union veterans and their dependents reliably voted Republican, even if the farmers with export commodities in their own states favored lower tariffs. As a result, tariffs on dutiable items increased from 19% on the eve of the Civil War to an average of 45% for the next 50 years. The adverse consequences to the South's export economy were significant and long-term. The South's post-bellum per capita income during the 19th century was only half the national average. Even as late as 1930, it was only 55% of the average. Joe Biden may not be aware of the historical voter bribery manifest in the Union veterans pension story, but his executive order forgiving student loan debt shows that he knows voter bribery works. In less than 3 months, 26 million voters with household incomes of as much as $250,000 each have applied for the forgiveness of up to $20,000 of student loan debt each. The 26 million figure is almost 4 times larger than the 7 million popular vote margin Biden had over Trump in the 2020 election. The failure of the expected red wave of conservative voters to materialize in yesterday's midterm elections may well reflect the effects of the student loan forgiveness bribery. Unfortunately, just as the Republicans of an earlier era gradually liberalized Union veterans pensions to bind the beneficiaries to their party ever more tightly, so too may today's Democrats gradually expand student loan forgiveness to build a new constituency for their party. Since yesterday's results show that American voters will not block such a strategy, it is left to the courts to rule that Biden's executive order exceeded his constitutional authority. That he did, in fact, exceed his authority is undeniable. Even House Speaker Pelosi stated publicly about a year ago that the president did not have the power to forgive student loans. Such action, she said, would require an act of Congress. Nonetheless, if Biden's executive order is not invalidated, all future presidents will unilaterally be able to bribe voters with similar actions. If the Union veterans experience is any indicator, the effects will be protracted. Although the Civil War ended in 1865, yearly Union veterans pension disbursements did not stop growing until 1921, 56 years after the war had ended. By 1917, a total of $5 billion had been paid, which was more than twice the amount spent by the federal and all northern state governments to fight the war. The Union Civil War Pension Act was adopted in 1862 to provide payment to soldiers wounded in the war or to their dependent if they were killed in action. There was no benefit for merely being a veteran. There had to be a concrete disability or a KIA. Only 8 years after the end of the war, the number of beneficiaries reached an apparent peak in 1873. The Commissioner of Pensions predicted that expenditures would soon stop growing when he said in 1872, "We have reached the apex of the mountain. Despite his prediction, the apex of the mountain was only a foothill. For the 30 years from 1880 to 1910, Union veterans' pensions averaged more than 25% of the federal budget. They peaked at more than 40% in 1893. Pension awards started escalating only 2 years after the last Republican-controlled carpetbag regimes in the South collapsed with the adoption of the 1879 Pension Arrears Act. So when they lost the control of the southern states, they needed to gain more Republican voters. And so 2 years later, they passed this Pension Arrears Act. So previously, beneficiaries were only allowed to collect a monthly stipend after applying for a pension. The 79 Act made the application date retroactive to the date of military discharge. Thus, soldiers who had left the Army years earlier could collect the arrears as a lump sum. At a time when the average worker earned $400 a year, the average arrears payment was $1,000. As one New York City magazine editor wrote, quote, the effect of this law is to stir up a multitude of people to apply for pensions who had not realized they were disabled until the government offered a premium of $1,000 or more for them to understand that they were disabled, close quote. By the mid-1880s, the Republicans were obviously using the pensions as an indirect way of keeping the tariffs high in order to block foreign competition for the manufactured goods of the northern states. After the federal government started running embarrassingly large budget surpluses, Democrats argued that the tariffs should be reduced. In contrast, Republicans increasingly favored reducing the surplus by liberalizing Union veterans' pensions. Eventually, mothers, fathers, and even orphan siblings were allowed to qualify. They succeeded with the 1890 Dependent Pensions Act. Any soldier who served a mere 90 days and wives who married veterans anytime prior to 1890 became eligible. Any soldier injured during the war who anytime later became unable to perform manual labor was covered. Within 4 years, pension disbursements doubled from $80 million to $165 million annually, and the budget surpluses vanished. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt released an executive order that made all veterans over the age of 62 eligible for pensions. He essentially deemed that any 62-year-old Union veteran was disabled and therefore qualified for a pension. Basically, he transformed a disability assistance program into an old age retirement platform. From 1862 to 1942, 80 years, the accumulated Union veterans pensions totaled almost $8 billion. The last monthly pension was paid in May of 2020, 155 years after the Civil War had ended. Will Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness liberality have a similar longevity? Well, we'll just have to see, but I'm concerned that it might. Okay, for those of you that like to learn more about the Union veterans pensions and other factors that impacted the Reconstruction era, get Southern Reconstruction by Philip Lee. It's, I think, $26 at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to get a copy from me, autographed, it's $30. Just email me, Phil, PHIL_Lee, LEIGH @me.com. There's a lot more in here than just Union veterans pension, but what you will find is there are a lot that is discussed here that is not typically discussed by other books that analyze the Reconstruction era. Most of the books from the Academy that look at Reconstruction focus almost entirely on race, but there was a lot more than race that impacted the Reconstruction period, and Union veterans pensions and their use in maintaining high tariffs is one example. Okay, that is our show for today. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you next time.